Here we go. Tomorrow is the exam day. What have you been doing? It's been a rainy weekend, so I hope that means you've been studying because hopefully, like outdoor events were canceled for you. If you haven't studied yet, the clock is ticking and you need some rest and you need to be well fed for tomorrow and hydrated and all those things. But if you're some of the people who, as I said, have been studying a little bit over time, like all year long, and especially the last few weeks, then you don't need to spend hours and hours this weekend studying. But some of you, all right. So I sent out that form yesterday just for last minute questions. I closed it this morning, and then after church today, I put together some answers to help you. Now, a lot of the questions you guys had, I did have in my review module for you guys. There's something there on earmarks and pork barreling. There's tons of things there on the documents and the SCOTUS cases. So maybe you like looked at them and they just weren't helpful, or just go through those that module and some of the things may help you, right? So let's go over some of the things you guys asked. One was the difference in due process and the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment. So, like I told you guys, a professor of political science this year, one of my conferences, told me the problem with understanding due, due process is that even when it was added to the Constitution, especially related to the 14th Amendment, there was no common agreement on what it meant, right? So that's why you're like, I don't completely understand it. Well, because no one 100% agrees on what it means. But due process is first mentioned in the Bill of Rights in the Fifth Amendment. And it says, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law, right? They can't just come take your life, take your house without it going through the correct legal channels. Now, the 14th Amendment, we think of it as due process and also equal protection. The 14th Amendment, remember, is one of the Reconstruction Amendments. But the 14th Amendment is basically, when it comes to due process, is selective incorporation, where it's taking something from the Bill of Rights and adding it to all government. So not just the federal government, but the state and local governments. So due process in the 14th Amendment basically says you have to take due process from the Fifth, and state and local governments have to use it as well. So I just found someone else's slide, why we invent the wheel, and share this with you. I also saw this one, which is a little bit more technical. If you're like, well, what does due process means? As I told you, as it was explained to me this year by that professor, it basically means that the government has to make the best attempt to be fair. That's basically what it means. So the government must act fairly and in accordance with established rules at all time. Now, there are two types of due process. I don't know if you really be asked on the difference. Substantive due process means the law themselves needs to be fair. So, sort of like judicial review, the courts can say this isn't even a fair law. This is a discriminatory law. This is not cool, right? Procedural due process means the procedures to enforce those laws have to also be fair. All right. So let's move on. How does the 14th Amendment and due process connect to SCOTUS cases? So here's one example. Gideon Wainwright, we know that dealt with the Sixth Amendment and the right to an attorney, right? So because Gideon couldn't afford one, he wrote to the Supreme Court, his case was heard, and they said, no, he didn't have an attorney, therefore, like, that was invalid. So that was unfair, right? He did not get his due process of the law. And that was in Florida, right? So that was applying the federal due process to the state. All right, does that make sense? All right, so some people ask, like, I need help remembering the SCOTUS cases, right? Hopefully, like I said, I have a few different review videos on there. You've been taking notes on them throughout the year. I have a module in the review module just on SCOTUS review that other students have came up with. But think of tricks, right? So I still remember when I had to take like a learn to study type course at West Point. The woman who taught it said, think of the most inappropriate way to remember something as possible, and you'll remember it. Now, I'm a teacher. I can't really teach you inappropriate ways to remember things, but think of that in your mind. What is some crazy way that I can use to remember this? So last year, people remembered Gideon just because it's 6 letters and Sixth Amendment. If that helps with you, go ahead. Or here's some other ones. Um, uh, Ones people get confused a lot is Marbury Madison and McCullough v. Maryland. I think because it's just too many M's, and it's the two 1800 cases we deal with. 5. So here's a way to remember it. McCullough v. Maryland is the supremacy clause, that the federal government has supremacy over the states. So if you just think Maryland is a state, that may help you. Marbury versus Madison is judicial review. If you remember, that was Adams trying to get the midnight judges through. Judicial review and judges. Hopefully you might be able to make a connection with that. So Maryland, right? Supremacy clause, federal government over the states. Madison, judicial review, because that dealt with the midnight judges. Here's another way to remember. What is the supremacy clause? You want to also think of the necessary proper clause and the elastic clause. If you don't remember those clauses, go back. Go back. You can do this and go over them. And the elastic clause, if this helps you remember, the world's largest rubber band ball was in Baltimore, Maryland. All right, that's like that exists just to help you remember these things. There's no other reason. What other crazy ways can you remember things? Wisconsin v. Yoder, right? The First Amendment and religion, specifically the exercise clause, right? The Amish in Wisconsin did not have to send their kids to school after a certain point because they could exercise their religion freely. So think of a strong exercising yodeler. Yodel, strong, exercise. If this helps, great. If it doesn't, forget I said a thing. Let me come back to this. Ronald McDonald, there are pictures with him holding handguns. And I was going to use that, but I was like, I don't want to be fired just yet. So I'm not going to use that photo. But think of Chicago v. McDonald, McDonald and the Second Amendment wanting the right to have a firearm. So just think of McDonald with a weapon. All right. George Lopez. Do you know who George Lopez is? Okay, comedian. So here's a picture of him in a school. Remember US v. Lopez, the gun-free school zone, but that was a violation of a commerce clause. I tried to find a picture of George Lopez holding money, couldn't find it. I'm sure AI could have helped me out there. Tinker v. Des Moines, I'm pretty sure you guys know that anyway. First Amendment, right to free speech. Symbolic speech is also speech. They were wearing armbands. Think of Tinkerbell on an armband if you have to. Think of Tinkerbell not speaking. 14th Amendment and the Baker v. Carr. That's what I'm connecting this with. So I thought of Route 14. Think of a car driving on Route 14. That had to do with redistricting. Maybe you're driving through different districts, right? And it dealt with the Equal Protection Clause. So those are just little things that may help you. I wanted to show you this because someone asked about the different types of committees. This is probably in your notes going back, but real quickly, a standing committee is a permanent committee, and they go over bills and revisions. They do a lot of stuff. Subcommittees are just that, subcommittees of the standing committees. Usually if you're in a subcommittee, you have expertise in that area, and you also go through all the process of going through bills and trying things out. Select committees are temporary committees. We saw an example of that with the January 6th committee, which was select. It now does not exist. Joint committees, think joints connect two pieces. You have the Senate and the House are both part of a joint committee. The committee of the whole, they debate the bill, but usually it's only like 100 people. So it's like, it's not the entire Congress. It's a smaller representation of Congress. So think part of the whole. They go through it, they debate it, and then they give the reports to the House in general, and then they would vote on this legislation. All right. So also think of ways to try to remember your documents. I know I've been giving you some all year. Here's some other ideas. Federalist 78 is one of that Hamilton wrote. It's about the judiciary, right? It mentions judicial review, even though judicial review wasn't really in the Constitution. Did it become an official thing into Marbury Madison? Hamilton defined it as the least dangerous branch, but he also said why it's so important. This is right from our friends at the National Constitution Center. Remember, they have review resources for you as well. So 78, someone last year came up with this one, flip the 8. It's like the infinity symbol. Judges and Supreme Court judges have that role for life. Hopefully that helps you remember. Um, this may make you laugh. That will help you remember. So that's good. Federalist 70. This was also a Hamilton one about a strong executive. Why we need a strong and energetic executive. Of all the presidents who've become president, the only person who was 70 when they became president was Donald Trump. Ronald Reagan was really close. He was 69. He was like a week shy of his 70th birthday when he was inaugurated. So very close. So just think of like a strong Trump. I'm sure he would want you to think of him that way. And 70, that was his age as president, strong executive. Does it help? Great. If it doesn't, try something else. Did I have one in Beccaria for you guys? Oh, I thought I must have deleted it by accident. Federalist 51, checks and balances. If all men were angels, no government would be necessary. Jamie Beccaria was the pitcher for the Angels, right? Checks and balances as a pitcher. That may help you remember. That was in Madison. Also, and I saw Barron's book has a mistake. It said Hamilton wrote Federalist 10, but that's not true. James Madison wrote that. And so Federalist 10 is about factions, right? Enlarging the sphere would dilute the power of factions. But make sure you know all the other ones as well. The articles know why they were weak and what changes were made to the Constitution, right? Know the Declaration, letter from Birmingham jail, Brutus, okay? Because when you have that FRQ question, you're going to want to refer to at least one, maybe two, and you might want refer to some other things as well. A lot of you guys had questions about, going through the vocab. Please don't stress out memorizing every single vocab word. There's hundreds of them. You've had vocab quizzes on them. Go hands down first, make sure you know the documents and the cases, right? Then just go through your notes. If there's like a few vocab words you're completely don't know, a few vocab words aren't going to make or break you. But if you have the big themes, you understand federalism, you understand separation of powers. That was another question. Someone asked me about separation of powers and how they've changed over time. The Constitution hasn't really changed as far as separation of powers. There hasn't been really an amendment to change that. But just by the nature of the beast, the executive has accrued more power over time. We've seen that whether it's through the use of executive orders or things like that, how media helps them with the bully pulpit. But the official separation of powers hasn't changed. So go through your notes. Like I said, don't get off track because of a few vocab words you might not know. But if you understand the big themes, the SCOTUS cases, the Federalist cases, then just go through your notes you've been taking all year. Hopefully you've been taking them, and it will be helpful for you. All right, guys, good luck good luck, you got this. I'll be in the OLA 1. If you have a last minute question in the morning, make sure you bring pencils, bring a pen just in case, right? Bring several of each, so that in case if a pencil breaks or whatever, remember the rules about not having phones in that room, and all those things. And just believe in yourself, right? If you've done the training, then it will show well tomorrow. All right, go for it, guys. You got this.